Now, I've shown these patterns of ratios of 2 and 3 and between different cycles and different things. Here's a case where we see a whole lot of them in one thing. This is the... Darn, we've lost the top of it, but that one's shrunk. This is magnesium 2. They measure the brightness around the fringe of the sun in the middle, and it's an indicator of the strength of ultraviolet in the sun. And this is a spectral analysis of it. It's looking at a period of time that's, I think it's a few years. I think it's at least one sunspot cycle. And it's showing peaks. Now, 26.74 days, that's the solar rotation period. So it doesn't surprise us if things come around after that interval. And half of it and a quarter of it, quite often the way the sun has its zone, the zone is a neutral sheet thing that runs like a tennis ball seam around the sun. So you get a half and a quarter period. So it's not surprising that the 2 and the 4 show up. The 3 to 5 and 6 is not so likely. But the interesting bit, the top left bit I've expanded out up here, and we find a period of 51.8 days, about 115, 159, 321 and 642 days. Now, relative to that one being 1 layer, 2, 4, 6, 12 and 24, exactly the sort of pattern we get in the harmonics theory. And not only that, this one's a slightly longer period, but it agrees with the 155-day period found in various other solar phenomena, and in some of the other ones that were found by the other astronomers. But the interesting thing about this one is it shows this whole long series of periods, exactly the sort of thing we expect in harmonics theory, in it. And although it's easy to explain these ones in terms of solar rotation, it's very difficult to explain these ones because they're multiples of it. And the producing subharmonics, which is what they're called, is not so easy to explain. This one is Indian rainfall. They have this monsoon season, and rainfall in India, it goes to extremes. You know, it rains for 4 months and it doesn't rain for the rest of the year. So you have to do some processing of that first to minimise the range of the thing. And I use the square root of the rainfall. And when I do that and I analyse it, it turns out, yes, of course there's an annual cycle, very strong annual cycle, so I remove that, and then I look at what's left. And the 4 green ones up there are 75 days, 153 days, 304 days, 627 days. It's that same series of doublings that includes around about 154 days, which up till now had only been discovered in the sun, and here they are in the monsoon and the rainfall cycles in India. So we're seeing stuff on the sun in here as well. If we look at the left-hand side there, the right-hand side is more or less the same. There's some rock formations near my home, a bit north, up Red Beach. They look like someone's cut stone blocks and laid them, but they're actually a natural formation. And they have very specific sizes. And the sizes, it took me a little while to work this out because I did it in centimetres, and then I realised, I'm using the wrong units. It's actually imperial units. Some of them are a foot. And there's a whole lot of different formations, and I found the presence in them a yard, a cubit, a foot, and different other ones. And so you can see that these ones, the red things are at regular intervals. There's a 2, a 2, a 2, a 3, a 3. Or if we do it in rhythm, you know, it's going. I call this rock music. And just above it, some other thing is playing another part, which is going 3, 3, and then down to a 2, 2, 2, 2. So they're very interesting things, but they show the presence of actual waves, because there weren't any things. If you remember my original graph, I had these X and Y things between the moons and the cells. There's no obvious things, but in actual fact we can find things in nature that look like that.
These are fractures, I take it?
Yeah, just rocks with little fractures in them. Yeah. And it goes on and on and on. I should have brought a picture that shows a massive... I joined together about 6 or 8 pictures like that, just showing the whole extent of the thing that is there. Yeah. I don't know if I put Thom's stone circles in England. He has a thing he calls a megalithic yard, and that fits in. They all fit together. A couple of economic ones. I analysed the share price of IBM. I don't know why I picked that. They all have share prices do similar things. And and when I got it, found so many cycles, and I thought, I need to reduce this. So I put these 67 cycles I found into this Cotil's method to look for cycles, periods, which the others tended to be multiples or fractions of. And when I did that, it gave me 2.5, 5, 10, 20, 60, and 120 days, which are regular 2, 3, 2, 2, 2. And all the cycles I found tend to be fractions or multiples of those numbers. So there's this pattern of 2s and 3s in the things. This here is some 200 years of copper prices, over 200 years. And in the list of common cycles I had, you might have noticed, you probably didn't because it flashed by, 178 years, 89 years, 59, 36. You might remember my 35.6 years and the 11.86 of Jupiter. Those ones there, they are harmonics in the proportion 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 10, 15. So they are some of the very common cycles. And I've given each one a colour, and I've put the little coloured diamonds on the things, and you'll see the biggest peak on the left and the biggest one on the right are 178 years apart. And then I will have put another one, and half of that will be the orange one. So this one here is halfway in between. Of course, the big cycles have a dip there, but there's still a peak there from the shorter part cycles. And at each point I've put which one's come to a peak, and you can see that there's a lovely little pattern there going along, where different ones are coming, different combinations of those. Whenever they come along together, you're get a peak in the thing. This one was about the distances to the nearby galaxies, and there's 3 items of interest. Something around about 170,000 light years, something just over 400,000 light years, and a couple of peaks around just over 2 million light years. Now, I mentioned the H2O molecules of our galaxy with the little hangers-on, and the little hangers-on are about a 1/12 of the distance between the big galaxies, and I mentioned that those peaks happen like that at many different levels. The 400,000 year one is a little over. One of the strongest geological cycles is related to the Earth's orbit getting more or less elliptical, and it's been set as 405,000 years, and that's actually been used as a standard now to date geological deposits back for 20 or 30 million years as a very reliable standard. This is a picture that NASA produced of Jupiter. They've ripped it open around the equator and opened it out flat. And you can see here, it's a little bit hard to see, but down here you can see these little necks going around, and you can trace them all the way around, and there's exactly 72 of them. You can see these little white dots. Now, they don't go all the way around, but if you put 24 things around, you pick up all those little white dots. So Jupiter has got a 72nd harmonic, which is one of the strong ones, and a 24th harmonic, which is one of the strong ones, going around it there. How am I going for time? I've got a little bit longer. That's this is Christchurch in New Zealand. There's little puffs of cloud there, and next to them, next to the little puffs of cloud, I put these little yellow lines with marks on them. Those marks are this Earth's circumference divided by 34,560, which is the first really strong harmonic that's predicted. So it's working on the circumference of the Earth, and we find other things that occur at that as well. That's just a picture of the planets in relationship to those cycles. So Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto are very close to exactly on that wave. Jupiter and half of it. The inner planet's not so close. Mars got confused.
That's a man.
So the outer planets are very closely spaced to equal distances. The inner planets are near multiples of 12 kilometres per second, so they're working on to a slightly different formula. This is analysis of black hole masses. Now, black holes, I was told by a Russian guy that they tend to like something to do with 160 minutes, which is an oscillation in the sun and in the solar system. And when I do this, you can see there are a few right on 160 minutes, and there's some at half that, some at twice that, and 3 times that. And there are other peaks at 12, 6 and 3 minutes. Now 3 and 6 minutes were the waves associated with the inner planets, and 12 also shows up in other things as well. I'm going to go very fast with these because I'm going to run out of time. Okay, if you can have distances have harmonics? And if time periods have harmonics, distance over time with velocity, can that have harmonics? And the answer seems to be, well, if you have two atoms banging together, according to my theory, the nucleus has got the vast majority of the mass. But there's this other bit, and it's one order. One of these 30,000 odd step ratio is different, and so it should be that when they bang together, the momentum is coming from the nucleus, but the sponginess is coming from that thing there that's only got 1/30,000 of the sponginess. So the speed of propagation of a wave, when I bang this table, the wave that goes through it will propagate about 30,000 times slower than what light propagates. That would be about 10 kilometres per second. Now that is typical of the speed of sound in solids. It's also typical of the speed of the planets and of the speed of stars. So we've come down from one step from there. If we come another step, we get about 30 centimetres per second, which is typical of the speed of heat and also of nerve impulses. There's different speed of nerve impulses. There's one there. Speed of ocean currents, and then finally, the next one is about the speed of continental drift, typical speed of continental drift. Now, we can't say these are exact things. There's clusters of things around them, but when we analyse the clusters, we find they do tend to have harmonic structure. This was something I prepared originally in about 1993 also. I looked at the masses of all the subatomic particles. I said maybe they behave in the same way that the masses of nucleus of atoms behave, that they like to be multiples of something, or fractions of them. So I did this analysis using the same method as the other things, and I got this one thing here, which I called X, and it was 68 times an electron, and we can see it's 1/3 of a muon, a 27th of a proton and neutron, a quarter of a pion, and so on. I've got all these, again it's got lots of ratios of 2 and 3. It also has one ratio of 17, one ratio of 19, and one ratio of 23, and they're happening in the correct order that we would expect those things to happen in the harmonics theory as we go to higher and higher orders. And most of the particles fit it. There's one little bit here that is not well linked to the others. I'm not quite sure what the linkage is for that. But as a result of this, I predicted in 1994 that there should be a new particle there, and that it should have about 68 times the mass of an electron. I was very lucky because about 5 or 6 months later, I saw a little thing in New Scientist saying someone's found a new particle. It's got about 70 times the mass of an electron, although later on it was varied to be 67. And that was being published in a peer-reviewed journal shortly later. Now, I've had arguments with some particle physics guys. They say there's no such particle, and I refer them to the papers where it was reported, and they say, yes, but it's not accepted. And I said, why isn't it accepted? If it had been one predicted by your theory, it would have been accepted, wouldn't it? Yes, yes. But it wasn't predicted by your theory, was it? No. That's why it's not accepted, isn't it? Yeah, I suppose so. It was predicted by my theory, so that makes my theory better than yours, and eventually they gave in. I begged them into submission. I like doing that. You might recognise this fellow, Leonardo da Vinci's man. A friend in Australia kept saying to me, you have to apply this harmonics theory to life. I said to him, no, life's too complicated. I'm just trying to work out the formula for the universe. But eventually he prevailed, and so I said, okay, if we're looking at wave structures, the vertical dimension of a person is the obvious place to start. And so we do the vertical dimension, and then we say, okay, that's one wave, and then we look at the half wave, and the place that comes to is the base of the spine, or the genitals. When we do it again, for some reason I'm missing one here, but the next one gives us the heart. And then the next strong harmonic goes 1, 2, 4, 12. So the next one goes 12, and that gives us these other locations here and here and here. And now these are the places that they're said to be chakras, here, 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 there. That one's not said to be a chakra generally, but Yogananda says that is a chakra. And then the other chakra is there, and that's 1/24th, which is another next very strong harmonic. So what we're seeing in the structure of the positions of the chakras, it is a wave structure on the height of a person. What's more, the waves, the nerve impulse, there's one nerve impulse that's about 1 metre per second. So in a typical sized person, that will go there and back in, say, 3.5 seconds. That's about the rate we breathe. It will go around the chest in about a second or so, which is about the rate the heart beats. It'll go in the brain at about the rate that the brain has its brain waves, or 1 second or a smaller part of it does. So all these things, and that one incidentally is also the delta rhythm when you're asleep. So those things, there seems to be a lot going on there if we study the wave structures of those. If we look at acupuncture points, they're finer still, and in fact the layers are basically inches. So the Buddha said in this fathom long body, if we take it as a fathom, if we take this as a fathom, this was a yard, this was a cubit, these other ones were 6 inches each, and then those are inches. We're made up of inches. If you look at your fingers, they come in inches. Lots of bits. The ribs come in inches, the backbones come in inches, more or less. The other side of it. So those structures are shown there. So we're now starting to get a little bit into the not quite so physical stuff. I mentioned before that there were these different speeds of different waves that were at these typical ratios, about 10 to the power 4.5 apart. If we call them continental drift and this sort of heat nerves, this sort of stuff, but we might want to call earth for that one, and water and air and fire and ether, which are sort of the classical elements, 4 and maybe that one. That's sort of a structure, and we see this sort of thing mentioned. And in Theosophy, they talk about inner octaves and other octaves and things, and I think they try and describe something that they can't quite work out how to describe it. And I think what they're talking about are these very big steps, and then within each one there are the actual musical ratios of the different things in them. So I think there's a possible explanation in these. We'll take this a little bit further. This was the original scale from subatomic particles through to the observable universe, and then I brought those down as the key points of the major things, the galaxies, the stars, the planets, the moons, etc. And then I put the velocity thing this way with the different steps. Now it's two-dimensional, and we've got 3 things here. We've got distance running that way, so these lines here are distance ratios of about 30,000. Periods this way, they're the same ratios that way. Velocities there, same thing that way. Once you define 2 of those, the third one is defined automatically. So that little grid, that's the universe wide web. And if we can put in there light, sound, heat nerves, ocean currents, continental drift, things can happen along lines of this grid. So there, one of the distances stars like to be is 11.86 light years. The gas giant planets like to be 5 astronomical units apart, or 10. In Jupiter's case, it's 5 astronomical units from the Sun. If we run a line down there and down there, we find where it meets is on the sound speed, and Jupiter goes around the Sun at what I would call a sound speed. Right? It's of the order of 10 kilometres per second. And so the universe, while it develops harmonics running down this thing here, it can have interactions in these other directions. If it's got either the same wavelength, then it can interact, or if it's got the same period, it can interact. So if the stars have got a big wave that's oscillating at 11.86 years, it can interact with Jupiter. Jupiter isn't on a wavelength of that, but it gets a little butt push every time and keeps it exactly synchronized to that as it goes around the Sun. That's the end. That's good. I got there. I'm sorry about the lightning speed, but I had to leave out 3/4 of the material as it was.
Well, thank you very much, Ray. I think that when the ancients remarked that God geometrizes and phrases like that, I don't think they knew just how big time that project was. How totally universal it was. Well, does anybody have any questions or comments to make for Ray?
Is someone giving them something, or they're just going to talk?
Thank you, Ray, for that. Cycle study is very important in the study of the wisdom tradition in Theosophy. And the basic study is based on cosmogenesis, coming from the ancient Indian tradition. And we have what I would call a unit of time, which is the Mahayuga. And I was wondering if you ever found any correlation in your study versus this cycle? You have been divided in 4 different areas, which are in a ratio 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, I haven't seen the 1, 2, 3, 4. Can't say I've really looked for it. I have found a correlation in from Buddhism, and I think there's probably some similarity in the Hindu and the Buddhist ones. The Buddha described the lifetimes of the devas, and the figures he gives are quite close to the 586 million year cycle. And then not every one of those, but every second one does that ratio of 4 apart, and he gives a few that fit in with those and go bigger as well. So that one I've seen. I think some of the periods used are in Hindu ones. They are the precession of the equinoxes cycle, about 25,000 years, and some of those other ones in there do correlate with physical cycles that we know about. Yeah. There was somebody else there.
I just wondered if these cycles that you're talking about with the wave, I mean, I only understood half of mostly what you said, but how would the energies, the electromagnetic field, be changed? To me it seems like because of these cycles, and you're talking about them coming through from the sun, for example, how when you analyse the rays, etc., that are coming down, if they're changing constantly, then surely when they hit us, after they've travelled through, say, the different equinox signs, etc., would that be what impacts, like, our personality, etc., to do with astrology and that type of thing?
I tried to tell you I wasn't going to explain life, I have a number of friends who are astrologers, and I tell them I'm not an astrologer. And someone says, but you work out things with the planets, how they affect the sun and how they do this, so you're an astrologer. So no, I'm not. But there are some hints. One of the things I haven't done here is my cymatics experiments. I should have had that. There's not enough time, which is oscillations in water that make waves. And you can actually see the patterns there, which explain what subatomic particles are really, the structure of them, and why they like to be at distances from each other and so on. And the way I see the waves relating to particles, it does give some indications, and from relativity you get this variation of wavelength with height. It will explain why when planets are near the horizon or overhead and down there, you do get a different structure of waves happening. So those things, I think, I can see some mechanisms by which some astrological things could occur. When I do these experiments in the water, they do make little rays coming out, little wave patterns coming out, like little steps, sometimes in 8 directions, and things like that, which is the sort of typical sort of things you get in astrology. So I can see room in there for some of the astrological stuff here.
And it's interesting that esoteric psychology does have...
I think esoteric astrology and psychology do actually have 12, I think even maybe 24 chakras, but we only know of so many.
If I do the harmonics in a circle and add them up, and add all the harmonics up, it makes a pattern that has positive and negative things and peaks in all the places that astrology says are the interesting angles, right? Yeah. So something's going on. And 12 is definitely very important in all of this.
Okay, Ray, just a question that I believe way back the planet Saturn didn't have any rings around it. A long time ago there were no rings.
Yeah.
And then there appeared these dust rings, and there's actually recordings of the sound that are actually coming off the rings. And I've also attended a lecture by a speaker that says that these rings are actually, the sound is actually amplified to, pretty sure it's Mars, which is directly... Is Mars very close to Earth?
Mars is relatively close to Earth, yes.
Yeah, and so the sound's actually being amplified and bounced on Earth. So my question is, were you aware that there were rings originally on Mars and that there now is a loud vibrational sound that's
Well,
coming off Saturn, I mean.
yeah.
Saturn.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if Saturn's rings hadn't been there forever, because they won't last forever. And the other major planets have all got, the other gas giants have all got ring systems of varying degrees. But Saturn's got by far the most spectacular one. So it would indicate, I think they have done calculations, but I can't remember the answers for how long those sort of things will last. And they didn't think that these sort of events happen very often until a decade or two ago. A comet went too close to Jupiter and broke up in pieces and went pop, 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 pop into it, you know. So if they can do that, they can presumably also get caught into orbit and make rings. So it doesn't surprise me if there was a period when they weren't there. I suspect those things might last for millions of years, but I don't know.
That was the something Levy comet, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah. And about the sounds, they say there's that's the one, yeah. Shoemaker Never, was it? Yeah. The sounds, the things that they report as sounds and that they play are generally actually recordings of electromagnetic things that they've then turned into sounds for us to hear them. And there is a website where you can get different ones of Jupiter and Saturn's rings and some of the moons and all different things. And they're fun to listen to because they often have sort of musical rhythms and things running in them. Yeah.
Everything is vibration.
Everything's vibration, yeah. I've heard of one that did the aurora. Some guy went and, now you can record, if we do it at sound frequencies, it's not so interesting, but he actually measured the light of the aurora and he recorded the fluctuations in that in incredibly fine intervals, and he played the sound of it, and he said he'd heard that somebody else had done this and it sounded like a fabulous orchestra. And so he had to make a mission there to do it himself, and he said, yes, it does, but I haven't actually heard the sound of that. I saw a nice movie of some of the aurora dancing around, and I wrote to the guy and said, can I get that off? Can I get your movie to try and generate the sound from it? But he said, they aren't actually real time, though. He was only doing one frame every 30 or 40 minutes, and they weren't exactly regular. So I might have a try with it, but I would like to have one that's where you know exactly what the interval is between the frames, to get that. But some things like that do show strong harmonic things, you know, patterns. Every second one is loud, or every seventh one sometimes, and things like that, with beats happening.
Now, I'm assuming that the Dewey you referred to in your lecture was the Dewey decimal. No, different one.
No, different one.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay, finish with that. The next question.
Yeah.
There was a New Zealand author, very popular, who's since passed away, Bruce Cathy.
Yes.
You would be familiar with his work.
Yes.
Do you support his conclusions?
His first book had a lot of weird maths in it that wasn't really valid. His observation of a grid of UFOs, I believe that's based on sound work, but he tried to do maths from it, and he later admitted that he's accepted that people's criticism of that. He then wrote another book called Harmonic 2880, which is in fact this grid we had originally. It's how many times that fits around the Earth, and you may have seen one of the strongest harmonics I had there was 2880. So I believe there is an energy system around the Earth that will have that harmonic. There will be other ones as well, but that's a strong one.
695.
Yeah, the 695 is not a harmonic in the sense that I use harmonic. It's actually a number he gets by doing calculations, many of which are not valid. So ignore that one, but the 2880 is a real one. And I've had a couple of chats with him about that, and I told him there's a next very strong one at 34560, and he said, what's that relative to the other? I said, it's 12 times. He said, hang on a minute, I do it in minutes of arc, and he divided it, and he said, yes, I do find that one also. Yeah.
What did you think about, he referred to the initiation of the explosion of atomic bombs.
Yeah, that was part of the one that had the weird calculations in.
So you didn't support
I don't agree with that, no. But the other one, I do think the 2880, I do think it's an energy grid of the Earth, and now you've got two possible conclusions, that UFOs are coming here and they know about the energy grid, so they travel along it. Because you do see UFOs turn at right angles, isn't that right? And so they are travelling the grid. That's one possibility. Possibility two is that there's an energy grid and there's some sort of discharges that run along it. And so they're just a natural phenomenon, not UFOs at all. So I don't know which they are, but I have seen things, lights in the sky that turn at right angles, so I know they do that.
They can't have any inertia.
Hey?
They can't have any inertia if they're not physical.
Which all sounds to me like a great
Yeah.
topic to discuss after
there are problems like that, aren't there?
Yeah.
But if it was a discharge along the thing, it could quite easily turn there, couldn't it? Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
a theory.
It's
Okay.
not a physical body.
Yeah,
No.
thank you. Now, look, that has just been extraordinary review of the universe at many different scales. I think the music of the spheres, the ancients again didn't realise what an orchestra. Well, maybe they did.
Yeah.
What it was. And therefore, I'd just like to invite everybody now to express appreciation to Ray.